Hello, hello. So I know it's been a while since we last did this. It's been like 3 weeks, I think, since this happened. I'm still in training at work. I think I'm finally done with it all. So hopefully I can actually do this a bit more steadily, which would be nice. We only got through chapter 2 last time of our book. So we're going to be starting with chapter 3 today, which is titled Bridwell. We'll see how long that goes. And like I said, now that I believe I am completely out of training for work, this should be a little bit more consistent. So, not gonna dilly-dally much longer. We're just gonna hop right into it. Oh, ugh, after I stop yawning. Okay. Alright, let's hop right into it. Chapter 3, Bridwell. Bridwell was at the center of everything in our small universe. It had 3 gates, just like the one we entered that afternoon. 1 gate for each walled road. Each gate was made of solid oak and iron and was raised and lowered by chains with thick metal links the size of a horse's head. Towers flanked each gate so guards could observe everyone entering and leaving the encircled town. "Raise the Lathbury Gate!" yelled the guard atop the lookout to our left. "Mr. Daly has arrived." The gate creaked ominously before us, stalled, and then burst back to life. It roared open, the chains grating against the stone wall, and the town crept into view as the sun hit the earth in front of us. I crouched down to see under the rising gate, and then I rose up along with the giant groaning door as the inside of Bridwell came into full view. It was just as I had remembered it, full of tightly packed houses and buildings crisscrossed by narrow streets. Not a single house was constructed more than 2 stories high, so none was tall enough to look out over the wall. The houses in the streets were simple, well kept, and crafted with extraordinary care. The homes were a mix of stone and wood, stone for the walls, aged hardwood for the doors and window sills, and wood shingles for the roofs. The roads and walkways were cobblestone, worn to a rustic brown but free of garbage and debris. In the distance I saw the one building that was a full 3 stories, which peaked just over the west side of the barrier between the town and the dark hills outside. This was the old prison building, a place where I had slept, eaten my meals, and looked for secrets in the many rooms and passageways. Once the convicts had been returned to Ainsworth, there was no longer a need for a prison in Bridwell. It had been converted, renamed Rennie Lodge, and was currently home to a library, 2 courts, and several classrooms for art masters and apprentices of various trades. A portion of the large building was also devoted to the annual meeting we had come to attend. Fancy rooms for boarding, a large kitchen and dining area, a meeting room for official business, and a smoking room with a large fireplace. Though hot during the day, it was cold at night in Bridwell, and a late fire was common even in summer months. Pardon me? Needed to take a drink. Okay. The basement contained a musty old cell block, hardly ever used except as a holding area for prisoners transported from town to town. We were a simple, passive society, and we generally kept to ourselves. The summers, though, were a time of trade for our craftspeople. In addition to the usual doctors, blacksmiths, storekeepers, and such, each of our towns housed facilities for bookmaking and repairing. We were known in Ainsworth as the finest and most reliable creators of ornate covers and sturdy spines, and it was said far and wide that we were a people skilled at the task of restoring the most treasured books and manuscripts. In the heat of summer, Bridwell was deserted. Most of its inhabitants were in Lunenburg, collecting damaged books for repair, taking on new projects, delivering finished volumes, and otherwise attending to the trade businesses of our society. Visitors from outside our kingdom would enter Lunenburg through a small, heavily guarded gate to collect finished goods. Often they brought along more books for repair and written manuscripts for setting into type and developing into finished books. With the many With so many of our inhabitants traveling and working elsewhere, summer in Bridwell was calm. Few people, an occasional quiet breeze, a place clean and tidy and ideal for exploring. We approached the ponderous square mass of Rennie Lodge and lurched to a stop. I was immediately down on the hard stone drive, glad to be free of the bumpy ride. A servant emerged and took my father's bags. I kept my own, and we walked the few steps up to the entryway. I hopped on each, counting as I went. 1, 2, 3, and entered the stone building. Rennie Lodge was divided into several sections. The entryway was a large open space with a hallway leading to the first floor classrooms, courtrooms, and apprentice chambers. Red velvet drapes were pulled back from the windows, and a dust-filled streak of sunlight poured onto the wood staircase leading to the second floor. Another set of stairs, hidden in the shadows, led down to the cell block. Oh dear me, it is hot today. I imagine it only gets hotter as we get up higher. Up we go, said my father. He was bounding up the stairs ahead of me, 2 steps at a time. I scurried after him, pulling myself up by the banister, just catching his shirt tail as we arrived at the top. Father was prone to grand entrances, and he burst into the smoking room with both arms raised, clamoring for a hug from anyone who would offer one to a weary traveler. "Well, if it isn't my favourite little lady!" came a voice, completely ignoring my father and whisking me into his arms. It was Ganesh, the mayor of Turlock, an amusing and lively man with a dry wit and a grandfatherly love for almost everyone he encountered. If Warvold was the brains of Bridwell, then Ganesh was its heart. "It's so dry round here, the trees are bribing the dogs," he said, his full black beard tickling my bare shoulder. The smoking room was easily the most comfortable place in Rennie Lodge. Lots of large windows adorned with velvet drapes, this time purple, filled the room with cheery light, and beautiful furniture was placed comfortably on ornate throw rugs. An imposing rock fireplace surrounded by inviting couches and chairs took up one wall. On another wall were double doors leading into the official meeting room. I glanced over Ganesh's shoulder and saw Warvold, his weary old body crumpled in a heap on a plush red chair. He smiled at me and winked, then reached his arm out toward me. Ganesh set me back on the wood floor, looked my father up and down, and said, "James Daly, still as full of wind as a corn-eating horse?" Ganesh and my father talked while I walked over to Warvold and took his dry and bony hand in mine. He drew me near his weathered face, his eyes still the bright green of a young man, and he whispered in my ear, "Later, when the sun is low and things have gone quiet, meet me in the dining room and we will take a walk down the streets of Bridwell." With the greetings complete and work to be done, it was time for me to go off to set up my room. On my way up the creaking oak stairs, my one bag in hand, I looked back at the massive smoking room, stone walls, dust dancing in the air, the echo of important men becoming reacquainted. I felt much too young to care about the politics of running our towns, and I sensed a strange sensation as my father glanced my way. His look told me I was not welcome in these discussions because it was not safe for me to know what they would speak of. Lurking in dark corners and listening would be met with unpleasant results. For as long as I can remember, we always stayed in the same rooms, and no one else ever came with us or was a guest while we were visiting. Warvold had but one child, a son, who managed the affairs of Lunenburg in his absence. My mother did the same in Lathbury, which was why the annual trips to Bridwell were for me and my father alone. Warvold's wife had passed away only 2 years after the wall was completed, and he had not remarried. Her name was Rennie, thus the naming of the lodge. Ganesh remained restless and enjoyed the freedom of solitary life, and so always arrived alone and seemed perfectly content to do so. Along the third floor hallway, the smell was musty and dry, a smell I acquainted with adventure and freedom. A few steps beyond the stairwell were the doors to my favorite place in Rennie Lodge, the library. There were many wonderful books in Bridwell Common, and most of them were kept at Rennie Lodge, guarded by my best friend in Bridwell, an old codger named Grayson. The library was closed at this hour, so I turned in the opposite direction and walked to my room near the other end of the hall. I could hear distant voices traveling up the stairs, rising into a meaningless garble. My room looked out over a sea of bright green ivy climbing up and over the wall. I gazed out along the edge where the rock became entwined with distant colors. I would be in Bridwell for the next 30 days with almost no supervision. While my father was busy running the kingdom, I would be busy exploring, and maybe, just maybe, this summer I would find what I had been looking for every other summer that I had come here, away outside the wall. Chapter 4. Purvis Cotter. From my room, and as far as I knew, my room only, a person could catch a glimpse of the world outside of Bridwell. If I stood on the sill of my window, which was about 3 feet off the floor, I could look out from the top edge of the opening. From this vantage point, I could see over the wall and into the distance. As soon as I arrived in my room, I perched myself on the sill and looked out as far as I could in every direction. I hopped down and went to my bag, unfastened the strap, and flipped open the leather cover. My father had scolded me for not packing more warm clothes, but the truth was, I needed the extra room in my bag for other things. Once all my clothing was put away, I went to work untying the lace in the center of what appeared to be the bottom of the bag. I had sewn in 2 extra leather flaps, which met in the middle and were tightly tied together. This created the illusion of a bottom and covered the lower third of the space in my bag. Now I flopped the covers back, uncovering a curious collection of objects. Hard candy from home, a pouch of coins, and a book, a wallet with small metal tools purchased from a traveling merchant in Lathbury, a compass, stationery with pen and ink, my letter seal, candles and wood matches, an old watch. I rifled through my collection and found the item I was searching for, a small ornate spyglass, an item that I had borrowed without asking from one of the drawers in my mother's bedroom. I slid the cylindrical overlapping sections open and ran my hand over the smooth, decorated surface. Paisley patterns of orange and purple flowed watery along its face, with smart brass rings at the end of each section. I clawed my way back onto the sill and peered through the spyglass. I could see rolling hills in the distance, mostly treeless and covered with thick brush in different shades of green. To the right, just in view, was the Turlock Gate and its twin guard towers. This was where the one person in Bridwell who despised me spent a good bit of his time, a wretched little man who was convinced that everything outside the wall was evil and dangerous. For reasons I never understood, Warvold loved him, and had even made him captain of the guards. I had to concede that his tenacity for patrolling the streets and walls of Bridwell was legendary, but his suspicious demeanor weighed heavily against him. He seemed to naturally sense my interest in the world outside, and on every visit I had made in the past, he shadowed me relentlessly. Mean, nasty, and always watching me. To my thinking, that summed up Purvis Cotter. My eye caught a tick of movement, and I was distracted from my thoughts of Purvis. Outside the northeast wall, the valley floor quickly turned into rolling hills, each one growing steadily higher and higher until it disappeared in the mist. The brush was thick and gnarly, colored in greens, browns, and reds. The farther the hills, the more the brush created a tapestry of color ever darker. In the distance they took on a somber, uninviting appearance. I saw the movement again about 100 yards from the edge of the wall in a patch of red. Could it be a large animal roaming? Could it be a large animal roaming the dark hills, or an evil beast stirring in the dense thicket? I drew the spyglass to my eye, squinting into the lens as I panned back and forth. Except for maybe a rustle from the prevailing wind, the brush was still. Maybe all I had seen was a bush shaken by the breeze. I continued inspecting the area, but eventually my neck burned and my back grew sore enough that I took a break. I collapsed my spyglass and turned to jump down off the sill, and there he was, standing in front of me. Well, 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 Alexa Daly! I yelped, lost my balance, and came tumbling out of the sill. It was Purvis Cotter. "What am I to do with you, Alexa?" he said, a condescending grin smeared across his thin lips. I rubbed my knee with one hand and placed the spyglass in my pocket with the other. I hoped he hadn't seen me using it. I rose and looked at him, feeling even smaller than my 4.5-foot frame. Purvis was barely a foot taller than me. He wore his black hair at shoulder length and had deep-set dark eyes. One can become lost in the depths of certain dark eyes, especially those of the handsome or pretty, but Purvis had eyes that reminded me more of rats and other creatures of the night. I was forever turning away when I encountered them staring back at me. He held his finger to his mouth, tapping on his thin lips as he stared at me. He had added a wimpy mustache during my absence. "I see you're back and as careless as ever." He paced around my room until he neared my open bag. "It's been a nice summer so far in Bridwell. Hardly a reason to work if you're a man of the uniform these days. Just one lazy day after another. But of course, now that you're back, I'll have plenty to keep me busy, won't I?" He hovered over my bag, ready to reach inside and dig through its contents. "I think the mustache makes you look shorter," I said, knowing I was taking a risk in a room alone with him. He jerked his hand back from my bag and pointed at me. "Let's get one thing clear right now," he said. "If I see you on the sill again, I'll have a chat with your father." He paused, glared at me, and placed his hand the bl- upon the black stick hanging at his side. "I'm watching you, Alexa Daly. So much as go near the wall, and you'll find my club against your knees. Do we understand each other?" I nodded. "Oh, and one more thing. I'll take that spyglass in your pocket," said Purvis. "I wouldn't want any crazy ideas getting into your head." "I don't know what you're talking about." Purvis raised his voice. "Give me the spyglass now, or I'll march you downstairs and make you give it to me in front of your father, Ganesh, and Warvold." If my father found out I had been spying outside the wall, let alone with a telescope I'd stolen from my mother, he would seriously restrict my freedom for the duration of the trip. I pulled it out of my pocket, had a last good look at it, and tossed it to Purvis. "You're a nobody, Alexa. A worm. And just between you and me, so's your father." He stared. He started back from my bag with a surly grin on his face. He was about to put his hand in when footsteps approached my room. Purvis quickly concealed my spyglass in his jacket and ran his hands through his stringy hair. Into the doorway strode Warvold, looking curiously at Purvis. "Culture, what are you doing here?" he asked, standing his ground between my room and the hallway. "Just catching up on old times with Alexa. We haven't seen each other for some time, you know," replied Purvis. Warvold stared at him accusingly, then moved out of the doorway. "Back to work with you, protecting the city from evil hordes and all that. Alex and I have a date for which you have already made us late." Purvis glanced my way. I could tell he was thinking about revealing the spyglass, but he didn't. "Very well, sir. As you wish," he said. Then he bowed and slithered out the door. Warvold escorted me out of my room, down the stairs, and into the night. The walk ended in his death, as I have explained, and it left me all alone, far away from the lodge, too scared to move. After he died, I huddled up against the wall, searching for what little warmth remained locked away in the giant stones. My eyes fell upon the locket around Warvold's lifeless neck, and then to his closed fist clutching the locket key, which got me to thinking about things one really should not be thinking about at such a time. If ever there were a person who would know how to get outside the wall, it would have been Warvold. I didn't know what other things that key might unlock, but I had a suspicion that possessing it might get me one step closer to sitting with my back against the other side of the wall. My desire for the gate key gave me an ounce of courage, just enough to touch the cold, bony wrist of a dead man in the dark. Without his coat on, old Warvold's wrist was thin and bare, cold and clammy, covered with a dry dust of desert skin. Wrapping my hand around the wrist, I lifted his heavy and lifeless arm. At that moment, all the shock I had been feeling left me, and I realized for the first time that my old friend Warvold was really gone. I'd never talk to him again, or hold his hand in mine, or listen to one of his frightening stories. I, s- I expected to feel dread when I touched his spiritless skin. Instead, I was sad and lonely. I sat in the dark, held Warvold's comforting hand, and cried bitterly. It took me a long time to gain my composure, but finally I began to lift Warvold's hand up so I could pry the key out of his clenched fist. About halfway up, I lost my grip and dropped his arm into the dirt with a thud. I carefully turned his arm over and set it in his lap, then peeled his fingers open, revealing the golden key. I drew the key up and unlatched the locket, then put the key back in Warvold's hand and closed his dead fingers around it. Inside the locket, I found two more keys. I held the locket with one hand and removed the keys. One was large and gold, the other small and silver. After thinking it over, I returned the large one, the one that had opened the gate, thinking it best that something reside inside the locket to avoid suspicion when my father or Ganesh eventually checked it. I rose to my feet, surprisingly sore from sitting in the cold for so long. After a final glance back at Warvold, I began walking in the direction of Rennie Lodge. In a single walk, I had lost so much, but I had found something as well. Chapter 5. The Library. Oh, let's see. It says I have a viewer. I don't know exactly who the viewer is, but thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to continue with Chapter 5, The Library. Upon my return to Rennie Lodge with the news of Warvold's death, I met Ganesh in the smoking room, enjoying a pipe by the fire. He held me tight, warming both my body and my downcast spirit, and we sat quietly for several minutes, with hardly a word spoken between us. When my father arrived, he was immediately more practical about the matter. "Where's the body? Are you all right, Alexa? We should think about what ought to be done next." But even my father, with his pragmatic approach to things, eventually flopped down next to me on the couch, his head in his hands. And now fell on Ganesh and my father to get things right, to become the elder statesman and take care of us all. As they sat in the flickering glow of the fireplace that night, the sense of responsibility they both faced weighed on them, forever sealing off a simpler past. People began streaming back into Bridwell the next day. Within a few hours, hundreds of people had arrived, and once word spread to all the towns, a steady flow of citizens rushed in from all directions. By the morning of the funeral, 3 days after Warvold's death, Bridwell was bursting at the seams. The town was only a few square miles in size, and the guards had let as many people as it would hold. The rest were lined up in caravans on the roads from Lathbury, Turlock, and Lunenburg. My father had been in one of the guard towers overlooking the Lunenburg gate, and he told me the line of carts and horses went back for miles. It was decided that a processional would be the only way to accommodate for large crowds. Throughout the day of the funeral, the guards opened one of the gates and let a dozen carts in on one side and out the other, then closed the gate and opened the next one a few minutes later. The circular procession lasted until darkness fell on Bridwell. After the funeral, my father and Ganesh both spoke about Warvold and his many achievements. Listening, I was taken aback again by all that he had been: adventurer, architectural genius, devoted leader. Purvis was as pesky as ever, poking his nose in at every turn, accusing anyone he could of wrongdoing, asking pointed questions. The crowds were also a problem, and poor little Bridwell took quite a beating during the days after Warvold's death. Then, mercifully, things quieted down. Emotions settled, and people thinned out. The town would soon be empty again. My father and Ganesh got down to the business of planning and welcomed Nicholas, Warvold's son, into their circle. Nicholas had the characteristic Warvold drive and ambition, but a generation removed. He was mellow and willing to listen and learn. It was clear that the three of them would work well together, and I thought I might see little of my father for the next few weeks as they met and discussed important issues. It was time to refocus on the business at hand, which for me meant finding a way outside of the wall. Now more than ever, I burned to feel the freedom of the forest and the mountains, and I had a new key that I had hoped would get me there. At 3 o'clock on the day after the funeral, with Bridwell reduced to a low hum of remaining visitors and residents, I crept up to the library to visit Grayson and get away from what was left of the crowds. In all the commotion since my arrival, I had not once enjoyed the zigzag aisles of books or heard the intimate creaking along the wooden floors as I browsed lazily for new reading material. Opening the door to the library, I smelled the delightful familiar odor of old books, and I felt the peaceful quiet the place always admitted. The library was a maze of high shelves piled ominously toward the ceiling with old volumes. Warvold had been a scholarly traveler, and the library was assembled from books he collected on his many trips. Later, as Warvold's trips became infrequent, he insisted that dig- dignitaries from all the towns in the land of Elyon requesting a meeting bring a beloved book. The more fascinating or well crafted a volume, the better a reception for the caller. As such, the library became widely known as the most expansive and envied in all of Elyon. Thousands of books on all sorts of subjects lined the passageways. The labyrinth of shelves led off in several directions, some ending at stone walls, others at wood benches, and still more winding around in circles or meeting up with other rows. But one trail of bookshelves led to what I consider to be the most perfect reading spot in all the world. Around one corner and then another, at the end of a long row, was a nook. In this nook was a small window that overlooked the ivy-covered dark hills wall. Set back in the corner was a cushy old beat-up rag of a chair and a wood box for a footstool. Tranquil, private, cozy. It was heaven on earth. I often sat in the chair idly reading entire days away, alternately napping and flipping through volume after volume. Many were actually quite boring, legal works and treaties, but others were histories of the cities and towns and regions of our land. The best of the books contained made up stories and legends, and some spoke of exotic animals found in fanciful jungles in marshland. I constantly searched for information about what might be outside the walls of the forest, the mountains, and the dark hills. But in all my searching, I found almost nothing. The few scant references to the mysterious nature of the magic that prowled around in the faraway places sounded like the tales I'd overheard people tell about our own wild area. But there was never much to go on, and never anything about matters close to home or about what sorts of creatures might slink around outside our walls. My napping was encouraged by Sam and Pepper, the two library cats who liked to take turns sitting on my lap in the afternoon sun, purring and begging for scratches under their necks. They wore, they wore peculiar but beautiful colors, jeweled leather all the way around, each dangling a small handcrafted medallion. The cats had belonged to the late Rennie Warvold, and they had lived in the library for as long as I could remember. They were quite old, I think maybe 15 or 16, and they slept most of the time. Grayson came in 5 days a week and organized the shelves. He was also a master at repairing old books, and he spent most of his time in a small office in the library, where he worked on misbehaving spines and torn pages. I loved Grayson even more than I loved the old books. He was kind, gentle, and maybe the best listener I'd ever met. I walked along the rows of books and poked my head around the corner into Grayson's office. He was hungered down over a large manuscript that had been removed from its housing, and he was busy devising a new cover to replace the tattered remains of the old leather facing. When he saw me poke my head inside, he grinned from ear to ear and stood up to greet me with open arms. His big belly arched my back as we hugged, and I sobbed a little, still tender from all the recent events. Eventually, I managed to gain my composure and look into his deep brown eyes. "You've gotten more reclusive since my last visit," I said, using my sleeve to dry my face. "How could you miss the largest funeral this place has ever seen?" Grayson shuffled his feet back and forth nervously. "I know, I know. I should have attended. Hate crowds, though. Hate 'em." I sat up here and pulled out Warvold's favorite books, shined 'em up, unfolded the dog ears, and fixed a few ruffled edges. He moved back around to the other side of the desk, running his fingers through his thick gray mustache. When he was seated, he picked up a small, tattered book. "See this one? This was Warvold's all-time favorite, the one he really loved." He held it out to me, and I took it in my hands. It was a medium-sized, black leather-bound, and in poor condition. The cover read "Myths and Legends in the Land of Elyon." Grayson continued. "Warvold loved this stuff. Crazy made-up stories and fables from every corner of the land. You would wander in here after a long day of meeting with your father and Ganesh and sit a spell with that book. Sit right there across from me. I would work on books, and he would read. It was nice, calm. Then he'd put the book back on the shelf and meander out the door, off to bed or to smoke a pipe by the fireplace." I flipped through the warm pages, small text, some writing in the margins here and there. "It's sort of beat up," I said. "Are you neglecting your duties?" He smiled. "No, ma'am. The old man never would let me work on that one. He seemed to like it well worn. I guess leaving that shabby old thing alone is my way of honoring him. Believe me, I'd love to make it perfect again. New cover, fix up the pages, clean it all up. But I get the feeling wherever he is, he would rather I left it tattered and torn. Can I borrow it for a little afternoon reading? I said, running my fingers along the cover. Sure you can. But take these two. He turned to his desk and picked up a stack of books. These are on topics you were searching for last year. Bears, forests, history of surrounding regions, that sort of thing. Not much, really, but I've been holding them up here for a while now, so either put them back or get to reading them. It was so nice to be in the company of a weathered friend, someone who knew I just needed to sit in my favorite chair and fall asleep reading. Knowing Grayson was in the library with me lent a special piece to the feelings I had about this place. We talked little, but we understood the language of our movements and the need for quiet companionship. I took my books with a wink and made my way down a twisting row of towering books. Rounding the corner to my chair, I saw a peculiar sight. Sam and Pepper sitting on the sill of the small window, and a hawk perched right there with them. When I came into view, the hawk beat its wings furiously, banging them against the stone wall before escaping into the open air. I jumped back, threw my books in all directions, and let out a loud shriek. Orville's favorite book came apart at the stitching, and its pages scattered on the floor around me. I stacked the other books on the floorboards next to my chair while I scolded the cats. Both were already on the chair, rolling over on their sides, waiting for me to pet them. I spent the next 10 minutes picking up pages and sorting them out, trying to put the book back into one piece. It was in reasonably good shape when I was done, but it would need some repair work if it was to stay together. Orville's one and only favorite book had been in my possession for only a few minutes, and I'd already managed to destroy it. Exasperated, I pushed the cats aside and flopped down in the chair. They crawled up on my lap, and shortly thereafter I fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 6. More Trouble with My Spyglass. I awoke slowly in the late afternoon heat, sweaty and sticky after what must have been an hour's nap. I felt around for the cats, but they were gone, which was odd, because when I slept in the library, they always stayed with me. After I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and opened them, I saw why they had moved on. I was wondering when you might wake up. It was Purvis Cotcher. He was close enough that I could smell his breath, rank from a recent cup of strong coffee. He moved to the window, drew my mother's beautiful spyglass to his eye, and mockingly looked about the wall. "What do you want?" I asked. Even in my sleepy state, I was surprisingly irritated. "I was doing my rounds, and I thought I might spy something with my new spyglass," he said. "The thing is, it isn't very good. I've half a mind to throw it out." He collapsed the spyglass and placed it in the pocket of his uniform, then turned toward me, an evil squint on his nauseating face. "I saw you in Warvold when you went out by the wall. I lost sight of you from my tower, but you were out there a long time. Then I saw you slink past the gate. No big rush, just tottering back to Ready Lodge." He had a hand on each arm of my chair, locking me into my seat, leaning his face close to mine. I was uncomfortable and scared, and wished badly that he would go away. "Now, Alexa," he said, a foul wave of his breath washing over my face. "What am I to think? Gone for over an hour with Warvold in a place you shouldn't be, carelessly skipping back to the lodge, and right after that we find him dead." Then Purvis added something strategic. "Has anyone contacted you from outside the wall?" "Who's outside?" "Don't lie to me, Alexa!" he yelled, visibly upset. "What's all the fuss back here?" It was Grayson coming up the aisle, the floorboards creaking as he approached. "Nothing. Nothing at all," said Purvis. "Go back to your books." Grayson stayed right where he was, but I knew bravery was not one of his strongest characteristics. "I said, go back to your books," said Purvis, one hand on his guard stick. Grayson shuffled backward, turned and walked away. Purvis looked at me with a prideful sneer. He let the uncomfortable still moment hang in the air as the sound of Grayson's footsteps retreated farther and farther away. He paced back to the window and leaned toward the sill with his hands clasped behind his back, looking for a long moment at the green and gray of the wall. You know, Alexa, now that Warvel is gone, I can do whatever I want. Your father and Ganesh can't control me. No one can, he said. How can you talk like that? I gasped. I opened my mouth and words come out. What could be easier? His thoughtless reply upset me. My father and Ganesh are in charge now, not you. I answer to no one, least of all your worthless father, Purvis shot back, loud and unthinking. Right then, Grayson rounded the corner with Ganesh in tow. Purvis went a deep red, stammered, and backed up against the wall. Ganesh had one of the cats in hand, scratching its head playfully. I love these cats. Don't you, Cotcher? So calm and gentle. Confrontation was not in Grayson's vocabulary, and he was well on his way back to his office by the time Ganesh set the cat down. Off you go now. Catch some ice. Ganesh looked squarely down at Purvis, towering over his short, wiry frame. Purvis tried to speak, but Ganesh put his hand up and motioned him to stop. I want to make sure I have all the facts straight. I'd hate to misrepresent you, now that I understand the magnitude of your power. Purvis turned redder, his lips thinned, and a scowl flashed across his face. I think what I heard was, I answer to Ganesh and Nicholas, but most of all, I answer to Mr. Daly. Is that correct, or did I leave something out? Said Ganesh. I couldn't help grinning, and Purvis shot me a wicked glance. It was either that, Ganesh continued, or maybe it was that other thing I thought you might have said, which will drop your rank to private in charge of cleaning horse stalls and peeling potatoes. Which do you remember? Purvis was ready to give in, ready to concede defeat. He was a hothead, but he was also smart. He looked at me, then at Ganesh, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the spyglass. He smiled. I apologize, he said. Alexa has given me some trouble in the past, and she's up to something now. That much I know. I got a little carried away. Of course you three are in charge. Absolutely. I won't let it happen again, sir. He gestured to the spyglass and went on. Anyway, this toy belongs to Alexa. I found it lying around the smoking room. Then pointing at me, speaking like a parent to a small child, he continued, You really should take better care of your things, Alexa. Next time I find it, I'll throw it away. And with that, he held the spyglass out to me. I was so excited to have it back, I reached out to grab it. Purvis pulled it back, turned its face to the side, and slammed it into the wall with all his might, smashing all the glass in the cylinder. No! I cried. Now, Ganesh, you know a spyglass is strictly forbidden in Bridwell, unless, of course, you're a member of the guard like me. Poor Alexi here will have to do without it, I'm afraid. Sorry, but rules are rules, and they must be followed. Purvis turned back to me. Here you go, dear. You can have it now. I took the broken spyglass in my hand. Ganesh looked like he was ready to throw Purvis through the window, but what could he do? I shouldn't have brought the thing to Bridwell in the first place. Ganesh told Purvis to get out, and he was happy to do just that, but not before he made sure I got his I told you not to mess with me look. I found out later that he stopped to talk with Grayson on the way out. He told him how snitches have their beds loaded with vermin at night, just the kind of veiled threat Purvis enjoyed using. I pocketed the broken spyglass and steadied my breath. It was turning out to be a bad week indeed. Ganesh held out his hand and I took it. Warm, big, safe. He lifted me out of the chair and up into a hug. Then he spoke with his wonderful, deep voice. I'll get Cotter off your back so you can explore Bridwell a little more freely. I know how you love to go sneaking around, and I'm all for it as long as nobody gets hurt. I writhed, writhed? Yeah, writhed loose and tumbled down into the chair, feeling much better. We both smiled. The problem we have with Kocher is that he's been around a long time, Ganesh said. And he is very good at protecting Bridwell. His guards are always in top form, he works tirelessly, and his reports are excellent. He's just paranoid about the outside, and you seem to bring out the worst in him, which is bad indeed. He paused and looked at me with his piercing blue eyes. To be honest, Alexa, I'm not sure how safe I'd feel if he wasn't around. Sometimes you have to take the good with the bad to get what you need. It's something your dad and I are still figuring out. Little did I know that it was something I would soon have to figure out for myself as well. still have one viewer, but thank you so much for sticking around. We've been at this for 40 minutes. Let's keep going. Chapter 7. Jocastas. Following my afternoon nap, I was feeling energized. I joined my father, Ganesh, and Nicholas for dinner off the smoking room in the main dining area. It was good to spend time with them, especially my father, who was looking a little worn out. I'd ask you to pass the bread, but you look so beat. I'm not sure you could get all the way over here, I said. You should join the jester's class in session downstairs. I hear they're looking for a good teacher, said my father. He did look tired, and even his comeback came off weak as he tried to bring some mental energy to the conversation. That's all right, Daly. You keep trying. Determination is one of your best qualities, said Ganesh. A distant third to my charm and good looks, added my father. We talked and ate for over an hour, enjoying the easy quality of our evening meal. It was the most free-spirited gathering of the day, and we all looked forward to it. Nicholas was captivating, and he fit in with all of us. He shared funny stories about Warvold, and we all laughed, and he knew when to let someone else have a chance to talk after he'd been going for a while. Warvold had been late to fatherhood, and Nicholas was a youthful 25. He was a good-looking fellow, tall with trimmed dark hair, and no beard or mustache. "Did I tell you I promoted our new friend Silas Hardy?" asked my father. "Who?" I replied. "The nice delivery man we raced on the way to Bridwell. I've made him a private courier, which means he carries letters for me whenever I want and burns all the ones Ganesh tries to send out. Hardy and I are committed to saving poor Ganesh from embarrassing himself." "Daily, you've got tongue enough for 10 rows of teeth," said Ganesh. "And you're so ugly your mother had to slap herself when you were born," said my father. This went on for some time, the details of which are not worthy repeating here. I wanted to get the conversation back over to Nicholas, so after a while I interrupted with a question. "Nicholas, can you tell me about your mother, Rennie? I know almost nothing about her, and I'd like to learn more." Ganesh and my father settled down and reloaded the plates while Nicholas drank his wine and gathered his thoughts. "Let's see. My mother was a tall and slender and pretty, with dark hair and good teeth. I always remembered her good teeth. Not sure why. Funny how our memories work, isn't it? Holding on to the strangest details about a person." He paused to take another sip of wine, and Ganesh kindly refilled his glass. Nicholas gestured his thanks and went on. "She was terribly interested in precious stones and jewels. My father had quite a collection of rare gems from his travels. Some he traded for, others he won gambling. I'm told he was quite a hotshot at cards and dice, and I suspect he crisscrossed the globe taking advantage of the rich young rulers, wherever he went. Rennie began making her own bracelets and rings, just trinkets, really, but she was good at it. I think most considered her a craftswoman of a high order. Later she became interested in tiny detailed etchings on sapphires and rubies, called jocastas, and the art remained her passion until she died." Nicholas pulled a necklace from beneath his shirt with a large stone attached. He held it out so he could look at it clearly. "You can't see the real detail because it's covered by a pattern that hides the real essence of the piece. On the surface, you see an elaborate etching, but if you had a powerful magnifying glass, you'd also see that the Jocasta within is a rendering of our family seal, a crown of thorns." Nicholas showed the stone to each of us up close and then turned it to look himself, straining to see the details below the surface. "I was in such a rush to get here I left my glass in Lunenburg. Otherwise I would show it to you. I don't know how many she did, maybe 30. The locket my father wore has a similar looking pattern, only the Jocasta is 2 tiny hearts with an arrow through them, symbolic of the bond between my mother and father." I found the idea of the Jocasta fascinating and wondered aloud if Nicholas knew if she had done any more that were still in existence. They took an awful long time to make, sometimes months for just one, so there weren't many to begin with. For all I know, she only made a few instead of a few dozen. She gave them as gifts to close relatives and friends. My aunt has one, and there are a few within the family jewels, but that's all I know of. In any case, without a powerful magnifying glass, you wouldn't know a Jocasta gem if it was sitting in your hand. Nicholas drank again from his wine. I recalled good wine as something Warvelt enjoyed. It was clear his son was fond of it as well. When I return home, I'll bring my glass so we can look at this one. Or I suppose we could send Silas off to get it, since there are only letters from Ganesh to deliver this week. The three of them were quickly back at it again. I wondered how long it would take for my father and Ganesh to begin calling Nicholas by his last name, or if they ever would. It seemed that with them you were a Daly, a Ganesh, a Warvold, or a Kocher. Being called by your last name indicated you were an important adult to these men. I doubted they would ever call me anything but Alexa. As I continued into the evening, wine flowing as freely as well-timed insults, I slinked out and went to my bedroom. I had seen my mother during the funeral, but she had stayed only for a day. My mother, much as Grayson and me, hated crowds, and this was the biggest crowd in the smallest space she or I had ever encountered. The walls had made them seem as though we were millions of ants locked in a glass jar, stepping over and crawling under one another. I had to send her a letter I really did not look forward to writing, but longed to be finished with. I dressed for bed and tidied up my room, flitting about in an effort to avoid my desk. I even reclined on my bed and started reading Warvold's book, which I had snuck out of the library, hoping I might tire out and fall asleep. But my guilt overwhelmed me. Sitting at my desk with pen in hand, I thus began. Dear Mother, I do hope your trip home was not too long. I suspect you encountered more dust than either of us knew could be kicked up by carts from here to Lathbury. I'm sure you endured a long day of travel, but it feels good to know you are home safe and sound. Things have settled down here, almost back to normal. I enjoyed dinner with Father and Ganesh and Nicholas this evening. Everyone seems taken with Nicholas, and I think he'll do just fine. Father is tired, working too hard again, but we are getting along well, and we find our spare moments to wander off together often enough for the both of us. I must tell you something now that I hope you will not punish me too greatly for upon my return home, though I will deserve nothing less than a sound thrashing with a willow. I wanted desperately to see farther outside the wall on my visit than I have been able to in the past, so I took your spyglass from your drawer and brought it with me. It gets worse. Purvis Kocher saw me using it, and he took it from me. Later, he returned it, but not before smashing the glass out. I am sorry, Mother. I promise to work day and night until I earn enough to repair this precious item that belongs to you. I know I was wrong to take it without asking. Can you forgive me? I'm off to bed now. Lots to do tomorrow. Grayson says hi. My love, Alexa. I folded the letter and addressed it to my mother, then dripped wax on it from my candle and applied my seal. I would give it to Silas at breakfast. I went back to my bed and began flipping through Warvold's old book. I felt sleepy almost immediately and placed the book under my pillow, afraid that Purvis would be lurking around my room in the middle of the night looking through my things. Which reminded me, what did he mean when he had asked if someone had contacted me from outside the wall? It was an odd thing to say, and I rolled it over in my mind for several minutes until I drifted off to sleep. Okay, quick pause, small quick pause. We are now at chapter 8. Doesn't seem very far. It's really not. But what do we think so far? I personally think that this Purvis Concher is a creep. I mean, his first name is a couple letters off from literally the word pervert, so he's a bit odd, in my opinion. But what about the Jocastas? Those little gem things with the super tiny, intricate details. Do you think Alexa's going to find one, or is Nicholas going to give her one? Or maybe she finds one with that little silver key that she found in Warvold's locket? I don't know. We shall see. So, been reading for about 50 minutes. I think that's a relatively good place to stop. We went from chapter 2 to chapter 8. So what? That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Went through 5 chapters. That's not bad. Like I said, now that I believe I'm done with my training at work, um, my schedule should be far more consistent. I should have more consistent days off. So that'll be good. I'm going to definitely try to do this at least once a week on my days off. Forgive me if that doesn't actually come to be the case, but we're definitely going to try and finish this book. I want to say. Wait, how many chapters are in this book? Because if I can do maybe 5 chapters a session, it's 27. Okay, let's see. Forgive me, I am not good at math. Oh no! Whoops. Oh my goodness. Go back here. There we go. That's what I want. Sorry. Five. That's what? 5 weeks, give or take. There's 28 chapters, including an epilogue. And again, if we read about 5 chapters a session, so about 5 weeks. So that would put us roughly at, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I did it every single week, we'd be able to finish this by the start of summer, which would be really cool. And then we could start the second book, unless you guys want to start a new book. But I think we should finish the series first before going on to other books. So we'd have book 1, then book 2, then book 3. There's technically 2 other books in this series. I just don't have the money for it yet. But I want to get them. But I want to get them in hardback. I definitely prefer hardback to softback because it stays better longer. Softback tends to just break on me and I don't like it, especially the spine. So we'll try and do this 5 chapters every session and hopefully be done by the beginning of June, which will be exciting. So we're going to stop it today. As always, any past live streams, any past readings are going to be uploaded to my YouTube channel, which I should actually put that up here at some point. I'll actually sit here and put it into the chat real quick. Give me just a second here. Please and thank you. Hold on. Do 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 do. Oopsies. Hold on. No, that's not what I wanted. Hmm. I think it's just like this. Right? No. Hold on. I can figure this out. Aha. Okay. We are going to go ahead and stick it into chat. Shabloof. That is my cute little YouTube channel. You can also see it that briefly over there. But if you're not too sure, the YouTube channel is the same as my Twitch, which is K Shiragawa. So KEISHIROGAWA. So I will be uploading this guy onto the YouTube channel. The first 2 chapters are up there already. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Or listening, rather, not really watching. We're not playing anything. Thanks for listening to me read again. It's been fun. And I hope you've been liking this book so far. I know we're only 8 chapters in, but I hope you've been liking it. It's nice to get back into the reading. I haven't read this book in years. Years. And I remember how much I loved it when I first first read it, but I'd forgotten a lot of the details. So next time, we're going to figure out hopefully more about this disgusting Purvis culture and more about Jocastas and see what other secrets Alexa finds. All right? I will see you guys next time. Bye.